Hello, my name is Coral Hahn, and so I've decided to name this show a pastime for two reasons. One being that I tend to be a personality that says things that most other people might say to themselves, well, don't say that, or, like they're afraid to say something for whatever reason, be it, the way that they're perceived or, how the person will take it or whatever, not a conflict person. I'm this person who's sort of, a lot of times, sometimes I have to think about something before a lot of times actually, think about something before I say it. I don't just like blab out things, but, I'll think before I speak. And but I tend to touch hot topics that the Christian community doesn't want to take touch with a 10-foot pole, and it's like it's past time somebody said something, and also past time because we learn from our past, we learn from our history, hopefully, otherwise we repeat it. So I want to address in this pastime video, sorry, I don't have a tripod yet, so I'm holding the iPad with my hand. But I hear over and over several things, and so I'll begin with the issue of being just a film critic. There's a tendency to use the word just in today's day and time. So with the Christian film industry and the non-Christian film industry, critics, termed critics or just critics, are looked down upon oftentimes, and particularly in the Christian film industry, and here's why. So first of all, there's a lack of understanding or a lack of distinction between what is negative and what is constructive criticism. Now, the reason I see that a lot of people tend to think that constructive criticism is negative is because if you look at the history of Christian film, film has only been around a century or so. It hasn't been around that long, but it's been around a long time. But in the past 30 years in particular, 35 years, there has been a boom in the Christian film production of movie after movie after movie. More movies now are being made about Christian film, in the Christian film arena. More films are being produced, but there's a catch-up that needs to take place with things in particular such as sound, lighting, character development, and cinematography. In particular, the major technical aspects. So when you look at the film industry in the Christian film, you see I don't have the URL or the website with me, but I looked it up. You can look it up on Google if you're really interested. You can look it up and find the titles of all the Christian films and see how, from the 70s, 60s, 70s on, upward to today, in the past 30 or so years, it's just been boom, 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 out, production, produce, and more films are being made. But the thing that so we as film critics do see this. We see the need for the growth on the technical aspect. Now, why is that important? Because we're dealing with a visual medium. So if your script supervisor is doing a time travel film, and you're in 18th century, 1800s, I forget what century, let's just say 1800s so I don't get confused and you don't either, 1800s, and there's a Coke can on the table, people are going to laugh and be like, what is that Coke can doing on the table? So similarly, with presenting God in film, we need to approach it from, a thoughtful perspective. However, many of us don't want to think. Namely because, one, as artists, our challenge along with our gift often tends to be, we come to the table thinking we've made the best thing ever made. And, we as film critics want to encourage you in your work, but we also see the issues that the audience sees. So we see it, when you're making a film, you're very closely involved with it, and you're very closely tied to it. It's your baby. It's your birth baby, and you just want to protect it. But, you have to, somebody has to approach this and say, okay, when I watch this, as a precursor, rather, to your audience, as a pre-audience, so to speak, I see this and that good aspect about it, but I'm, as a pair of fresh eyes, not somebody who has been constantly in the rewrites and the development and involvement and all this from an outside eye, which is very helpful, by the way, saying, okay, I can see how this and this, and I see what you're trying to do. I see what you're trying to communicate and present. However, as somebody totally new to this story, but not new to film per se, who is knowledgeable in film and who can see what you're presenting and all this, can say, I can see this might be better if you did this or that. So, we tend to think of constructive criticism as negative because the church so largely presents God as light and fluffy love instead of rather both that and tough love. So God is very tender. He's a good healer, wonderful healer, very near to the brokenhearted, but he is also tough. And why is he tough? Because he wants us to not stay That's a tongue twister. He wants us to not stay stagnant, but to experience the beauty of movement and the beauty of the movement of his spirit in our life. And so often what the Christian film industry does in particular, and what the tendency has gotten into the mode of, is presenting the gospel story, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But if I were to, so to exemplify what I'm saying is it's not a bad thing, but if I were to, I don't want to say but, I'll just say, like, for example, we have done this salvation story over and over and over again, and we've kind of I give people tops of not exhausting the ways to do it, but it tends to be our prerogative or our goal, rather, in our presentation of the gospel story to preach God. And so we sing in church, the We Shall Overcome songs, overcoming songs, but we don't remember or look to Revelation where it says, there's two things to overcoming. It's not just this, it is the story of Jesus. It is the gospel story, but it's also our testimony, because it makes it personal, it makes it present and real. So when we don't share our testimony and we're just saying, God this, 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 I wonder how many times I could keep that up. You probably got annoyed after like the third time I said that, huh? So it's a bit of an extreme example, probably an extreme example, but it's actually not that extreme example to me, is when I go into the Christian film, I see, in my mind, it's like a commercial for like laundry detergent. You know how you see the generic brand, no names, just like red bottle after red bottle, or blue bottle after blue bottle after blue bottle on the shelf, and it's like, well, I know what I'm going to see, but which title am I going to pick? Which title am I going to pick? I know what I'm going to see. So we call God's story, the adventure story. Like we call we're saying that faith is an adventure, but we're using reliability as a crutch, kind of, in my viewpoint of looking at all this. And so it's hard, as a Christian filmmaker and a Christian film critic, so to speak, of being, I can speak for other people, but I try for my own self to be kind, but I do see a need, so I try to be kind. I am kind as possible, but even though I'm kind, truth can tend to is a double-edged sword. So I'm sorry if you get cut. There is a truth that needs to be, there is a need in the Christian film industry. And so, like I said, we tend to say, we sing about overcoming in the church, and yet we're in the Christian film industry saying over and over, God this, God this, God this, God this, God this, God this, God this. And what that does, other than annoying people to death, is it's lacking the personal testimony. And, it saddens me, because we're meant to experience that blessing of having His Spirit, God's Spirit, Holy Spirit, move in our life and move us to not just be stagnant, but to, and I don't know of any Christian psychological thrillers, but we respect stories such as Tolkien or Narnia, like the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Narnia, that sort of thing, but we haven't really delved into, stories like that, or there are plenty of like sci-fi fantasy books in the fiction, in the Christian, I almost said Christian film, sorry, Christian bookstore, of books that I've picked up, and I'm like, this would make a great story. This should be a film. Like, it's original, it's thoughtful, and so when we say no, and we just want repeat of the same thing, we grow lazy in our faith. We're not exercising our brain muscle. We're not exercising our spiritual being, our spiritual life. So, I've said a lot. I've rambled. But thank you for rambling along with me and listening. I'll try to wrap this up. So when we don't exercise, we're not being the Berean. And for those of you, most of you may know what I am talking about when I talk about the Bereans. But for those of you who don't know, basically, the Bereans, when Paul was preaching, they didn't just have the response like, oh yes, we accept what Paul says. What Paul says is the best thing ever. It's like better than the Bible, or whatever. Like, not questioning him. They question him. But in today's society, in today's Christian society, we tend to not know how to question. So people take a question as like, how dare you? like question my faith or insult it. I was like, no, I'm asking you a question. Some people are facetious, granted, but I'm one of those people that is like, well, why do you like this, or why do you think that? Because I want to learn about you, and I want to be able to. I know that my way of thinking is not the only way of thinking in the world. So I'm saying, conveying, I appreciate what you have, I would like to hear what you have to say. I'm curious. So, but in today, and no thanks to technology nowadays, because when we read things, we don't know, we don't have a, like in script, says in tone of da-da-da-da-da, so we don't have that context. Maybe I should institute that. Maybe I should say that from now on. In tone of da-da-da-da. I don't know if that would help. But, so we don't exercise that, and we don't receive the blessing from exercising our thought muscle. Because in film, the film critics, as I had mentioned earlier, we're looking at it from fresh eyes, from a pre-audience. We're seeing things that are good, but also things that need work. And, we just need to not let our artistic egos get in the way. Because, even Edgar Allan Poe, I think it was Edgar Allan Poe, he came up to his friend, so I hear the story of, I've come up with written the best thing ever. Is our tendency as people, as our tendency, even in the Christian film industry community, or the Christian writing community, the Christian arts. For example, in high school, when I was still growing in my faith, I experienced this person coming to me with this book, which wasn't the Bible, but and I'm not saying that people don't have anything to offer. I'm not saying that you should shun their wisdoms, because these people who are writers, they do have good things. They do have good things to say, that wise things that will, make you think. And that's why we like it so much, is because it makes us think. But then we tend to put them on a pedestal. The danger is to put them on a pedestal and go like, they've written the best thing ever, like I love their book so much. But we are called to love the Bible more. We are called to love God more. And if more people took the time to dig in the Bible, you'd find so many treasures, and just being able to just a little bit at a time, a little bit each day, to say, wow, I found, I've read this story over and over, and yet new aspect just, spoke to my life. That's the Holy Spirit. So to get us to realize and think and exercise that brain muscle in our spiritual being, we tend to want to say like, oh, this is the best movie ever, or this is the best song ever, or this is the best book ever, and they're the best author, or best best this or that, and I'm not saying don't encourage them. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they're not good. They're very talented, I'm sure. And I've seen some very good talent, very good personal testimony from some of them. But we need to watch out as Christians that we don't put man before God. That's our mentality of the church. The danger of, in the entertainment industry, well, why don't you just, there's the word just again, well, why can't you just be entertained? Because we want to be entertained by the sermon. We want to be entertained by the book. We want. What does God want? Do we stop to ask ourselves that? And I have to ask this of myself too. do I stop and ask myself that often, what do you want, Lord? Instead of, what do I want? So, that was my rambling on film critics in the Christian film industry, what they're not like, and what they are like, and some of where this mentality comes from in the church, the thinking behind, and the percentage that we don't see behind what we say, I guess, is what I'm trying to elaborate on and bring to light. So may you have a blessed night. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and to get you to exercise that brain muscle and your spirit, and to continue creating, continue to create great films, continue to grow. This has been Pastimes. This has been Pastime. Bye.